Hello, and welcome to the third episode in our Energy Transition in Conversation series. My name's Owen. I head up the Energy Transition team here at Reuters Events, and over the past few weeks, we've been joined by CEOs from across the energy spectrum who are committed to a sustainable energy future and ready to tackle the energy transition head on. This is very much an interactive session, so do ask any questions as we go, and we'll try and get to them at the end. Today we have the absolute privilege of being joined by Axel Thiemann. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Sonnedix, and with over 260 power plants across 8 countries, Sonnedix recently reached a gigawatt of capacity and is a company that really builds solar plants that endure. Axel, thank you for joining us today. How is everything with you over in Miami?
Yeah, thanks, Owen. Things are good, and very excited to be here.
Good, yeah, great. I think really a good place to start, really, for everybody tuning in who's perhaps less familiar with the work you do. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that work you do at Sonnedix and kind of what your vision is for a more sustainable energy future?
Yeah, happy to do that. So Sonnedix is a global solar power producer. We have a team of roughly 300 people around the world that develop, finance, build, and ultimately operate solar power plants. We have roughly a gigawatt of power plants currently operating, 400 megawatts under construction, and a pipeline of 1.5 gigawatts. And to bring that a little bit more to life, to make that more tangible, last year we avoided a little bit more than 400,000 tons of CO2, which is the same as if taking 100,000 cars off the road. And then that's really our purpose to harness the power of the sun to build a bright future. And with regards to the global piece, our main markets are France, Italy, and Spain, where we are among the 5 largest solar IPPs, and Japan, where we're one of the largest foreign power producers, solar power producers, and Chile.
Sure. No, that's a great intro. I think, yeah, I mean, you've been part of it really. I think over the last kind of 10 to 20 years, really, we've seen an incredible growth in solar, which has obviously moved from a novel technology to a key player. That said, temperatures are still rising, and there is a feeling amongst some that the energy transition perhaps is failing. In your opinion, do you feel that we are failing on this, or do you kind of see progress? What's your feeling for the energy transition moving forwards?
That's a tough question, and so I think looking at the numbers today, I think that there's really cause for concern. If you think back at the Paris goals, according to Paris, we would have to reduce CO2 emissions from energy by almost 4% a year until 2050. And unfortunately, the last 10 years, we haven't been able to reduce at all. We've actually increased by roughly 1% per year. So it's not just that we're not reducing, not quickly enough, we're actually still increasing. So obviously, we're not currently on track. But I think there's hope, and I have hope for 2 reasons mainly. One, I think it's human kind of capacity for change, and the other one is technological innovation. If you think back, over the last 10 years, really renewable energy has made enormous strides. So, for example, the cost of solar panels has reduced by 90%. And today, it is cheaper to build a solar plant than to build almost any conventional plant in most parts of the world. And in some parts of the world, it's actually cheaper to build a plant than to run an existing plant. So that makes solar not only a green choice, but also a smart economic choice. And I think the economics play a big role when it comes to change and to the energy transition. The other reason is the capacity for change. And if you look at the COVID crisis that we are just going through, it is a really unprecedented crisis. But what we've seen is that governments, regulators, really across the world have the capacity to enact large-scale change if the scientific evidence is overwhelming and if it's urgent. And that gives me the hope that something similar can happen for climate change. I think the scientific evidence is there. It's not yet perceived as urgent, but the technology is there, the economics are there, and ultimately, there is the capacity for change. It's not yet there, but I believe we can still make it.
Sure. I think you pick up on an interesting point there when kind of talking about those kind of falling costs and also the capacity there for change to come from a government level. How do you think those things balance up? And if you're looking at kind of what would or may really turn the dial on decarbonisation, do you see that coming from falling technology, or do you see it coming from governance? Where do you think you would, maybe pin your hope if you were looking forward?
Well, that's probably a whole other webinar series, that question, if you want to go there. I think it comes from many places. I think technological innovation is going to play a very, very big role and has played a very big role. But without regulatory and government support and the willingness for change, it's not going to happen. If you look at the things that have happened, renewable generation has gotten really, really cheap. What's necessary is the ability to interconnect to a stable grid, the ability to permit and to develop plants and do that efficiently, and to contract, so you have certainty of payment. And ultimately, what we're seeing now is to deal with the intermittency that renewable plants generate in the grid if we do more and more. And what we are doing there is we are very actively developing in all the markets that we are present. We are working very actively in the contracting part. So we just signed a couple of PPAs, even during the COVID crisis in Spain, in Japan, an unsubsidized PPA, in Chile. And Chile is actually very interesting. This intermittency challenge that we have. We produce electricity when the sun shines, and here we signed a baseload PPA, so we are providing electricity when the customers need it and want it, and we are partnering with a wind provider that fills the gap that we have in the night. So we're providing green energy purely from solar and wind sources, so purely from renewable energy, and I think that's part of the kind of solving the intermittency problem. And obviously there's storage. That's a very big topic. It's a whole other webinar series too, probably. And that I think will play a big role in getting there. But there's still a lot of things to do. We have some pilot plants, but we're not yet at industrial scale for really baseload generation.
Sure. I think kind of you begin to touch on it there, but really honing down then on the role of solar specifically. Where do you think that kind of future for solar lies? Is it in kind of PPAs, M&As, more kind of that co-location point you just kind of touched on? And really, what are you doing at the moment to kind of plan for this and prepare for this now?
So we really believe that this future for solar is bright, but it's not surprising. I mean, given the organization we are very technology focused on solar, and we believe that with the right certainty provided by regulators and by the government, so to allow us to be part of that system, we can compete against conventional energy in the markets that we operate, and that's what we're working towards. So we are actively developing power plants in these markets in order to contract and then continue to grow our fleet of plants and provide cost-efficient green energy. And a lot of the focus goes in the contracting part. All our investment, that ultimately in our case is provided by pension funds largely, goes in at the beginning. So different than other plants, we don't have fuel costs. So we're taking a big gamble at the beginning to put all the capital in, and we need certainty of getting paid, and that's a large focus for us. So contracting with customers that are looking for our electricity and making sure that we have the right way of fulfilling their needs is a big part. So we are actively working on that, looking for more power purchase agreements. And in addition, we just joined the EX, European Energy Exchange, as another way of allowing us to contract the electricity supply from our power plants and provide us this certainty of being able to sell it. So those are a couple of things that we are working on to kind of get us into the next stage of the unsubsidized solar age and the energy transition.
Sure. I think that's interesting, and thanks for sharing that. I think one of the great things about Sonnedix that kind of I've picked up on is that ESG element, and how you kind of place that also at the heart of a lot of what you do when looking towards that kind of energy future. Within your planning and within these kind of discussions that we have now, how much are you looking towards kind of the later life and the end of life aspects of your solar plants, and how are you really kind of, if at all, helping to progress kind of that next generation of sustainable technology?
Yeah, so that's really, I think, at the core part of ESG, and ESG is important for us. Has been for a long time. The end of life issue that you bring up is an important part of the environmental part. And I think first, the end of life of solar plant, I think, is very far away. I think what we are going to see is that once a solar plant is built and connected to the grid, we'll see innovation, we'll see repowering, ramping, but I think we'll see this power plant connected to the grid for a long time and generate clean energy, maybe enhanced with storage to provide baseload, but to be there for a long time. Now, not all of the components will be there for the whole time. I think panels is the most obvious component where there's a lot of concern about the end of life. So panels degrade over time, and the repowering is essentially replacing old panels with new, more efficient ones. The good thing about panels is they're largely glass and metal, so they can be recycled. So 95% of the panel can be recycled, and it's a big part of our planning. So we are members in a number of schemes, depending on the country and on the type of panels, to ensure that nothing of our panels ends up in a landfill, but is part of a recycling program to make sure that we really minimize our footprint in the long term.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's interesting as well. You touched on it there, that point around kind of different markets and approaching them differently. I know, as you mentioned at the beginning, really that kind of a big part of your focus outside of Europe is in Japan, for instance. How are your operations outside of Europe? Is there anything you're picking up on that's perhaps a little bit different? And yeah, how's it going from that point of view?
Yeah. Yes, true. So our largest markets today are still in Europe from an operational perspective, sure. France, Italy, Spain. But out of the construction portfolio that we have, almost 400 megawatt, actually most of that is outside of Europe. It's in Japan and in Chile. And actually, I'll just use the opportunity to shout out to the teams. Throughout the crisis, things have been continuing, and we've been continuing to build and connect plants. Looking at the differences and similarities in the markets, I think the questions are the same that I outlined earlier. It's really about certainty, being able to develop, to connect to the grid, to offtake, and to deal with intermittency. And we're dealing with the same problems in every market. The priorities are slightly different. So if you take Chile is a market with great irradiation, as one of the highest solar irradiations on the globe. It has copious amount of empty space that are relatively easy to build on. So developing access into the grid is not kind of the big question that we are tackling there. It's really about the contracting. So being able to find the right off-taker for us to be able to sell our electricity to for the foreseeable future. That's our big focus there. And I mentioned the example earlier. So I think we have good traction doing that. Japan is for example, it's a different challenge. If you look at the market, it's much more densely populated. There's not much deserts in Japan. It's very mountainous. So finding the right place to develop and to build efficiently and to build costs efficient is a much bigger problem there. And that's where a lot of our effort goes there. And that ultimately also makes solar kind of a little bit more expensive, depending on how well we can build and how expensive that is. Sure.
I think what would be interesting to move on to potentially is that kind of question about, if you place solar within the wider context of a new energy mix, we're obviously seeing kind of incumbent oil and gas companies increasingly rebrand and pivot and start to look at renewables as really the future of their businesses. As a kind of a pure play pure play renewables company. How do you perceive this? Do you perceive this as a threat? And if so, I guess how are you preparing for that?
Yes, good question. The competitiveness, the competitive tension. I think so. From one perspective, having more competitors, I think, is a reflection of the market being much more attractive than it used to be. So in 2009, I think globally the world installed less than 10 gigawatts, and last year it was more than 110. So the growth has really been dramatic, and there's a lot of space for people to come in. And if you look at the energy transition, obviously in a more attractive market, more competitors are better to really drive the energy transition. And also the attractiveness has opened up new options. For example, if you look at bank financing 10 years ago versus now, it is much easier now to get access to debt capital to allow us to build. So to some extent, competition has made it better for everybody. And it's a reflection of this field maturing and becoming much larger. And there's a lot of space. And I would say there's a lot of space for different specialties. So you mentioned the oil and gas companies. They have, enormous balance sheet. They can really put cash to work and develop large projects. And they also have tremendous project management skills, so that they can really handle really large, complex projects. If I look around the renewable energy space, where that really is a competitive advantage, it's not necessarily in solar. It's really much more in offshore wind, where you have the same characteristics of enormous, complex projects, complex logistics that need to be handled. So I think their oil and gas companies will do very well. I think we have an area where we are competing. We are focused only on solar. We have people that are really focused, passionate, and that means we can be quicker. We can also be, to a certain extent, more creative and innovative when it comes to solutions around that space. And I think this is where we will succeed in the long run. So there's a lot of space. Competition obviously is something that we're watching very closely, but I think we have a recipe to be successful.
Sure. I think out of interest, really, more than anything, again, looking at the kind of the wider energy space and obviously everything we've seen with oil price and everything like that lately, has that affected you, the kind of crashing in oil demand and oil price? Is it a positive thing, or does that have knock-on implications for solar companies like yours?
Yeah, the oil price drop, or generally the energy price drop, I think for us is difficult to differentiate between the oil price war and COVID. But what we've seen is power markets globally affected. I think we've seen electricity prices in a lot of developed markets that have been subject to lockdown drop by up to 30%. Now, for us, luckily, that is not a concern for the short term. So we are very highly contracted. So the kind of merchant, the pool price is dropping, doesn't have a big impact on us today on the core business and what we generate today, but it affects our growth opportunities, because obviously we are competing with all sorts of generators in the market, and having fuel costs drop that dramatically changes our competitive position. So we are watching that space very closely. It's not so much what really the oil price is doing today. It's really about the forecast, what it's going to do in the next 5 to 10 years that we are watching. But I think where we are today, I think we're going to stay competitive, and we'll kind of navigate through that in the same way as in the past.
Sure. I think, well, good news then to some extent, but I think we've touched on it briefly kind of throughout, and I think obviously the current pandemic is something that's hard to avoid really in any conversations at the moment. But really, it would be good to know just more generally how the crisis has affected you, and also I think more importantly what you've done really to overcome these challenges that it's faced, or potentially what you're putting in place now to overcome challenges which may arise in the next year and year after.
That's really the topic of the day, or the month. And I think to start with, we are in a very, very fortunate position if I compare kind of to a lot of other people and other market participants. So our business really is, we generate electricity when the sun shines, and that happens unless or until something breaks, and luckily things don't break so often. So our core business really has not been very much affected. Where we have seen the impacts is on the growth side, and obviously in the well-being of our people. And our main focus throughout the crisis really has been focused on the team and their families, to make sure that they are well. So we've looked after their physical well-being, so make sure that they're safe and secure, their financial well-being, to make sure that, you know, concerns around that are not an issue for our people and their families, and also their mental well-being. We've experienced lockdowns. We've large teams in Italy and in France and Spain where we had really severe lockdowns, and make sure that people have the right support through that has been a big topic. Starting with fit out for the home office, make sure that everybody's the right place to work, through daily gym sessions and desk gym sessions and support calls up through kind of psychological helplines for everybody. That's been the big focus, with the philosophy: if the team is okay, then we can really weather all challenges that get thrown at us. And I'm really immensely proud of the team. So I think the team has pulled together on this, and we see continuing growth. Things have slowed down a little bit. I think they've slowed down for everybody, but we see, as I said before, we see construction progressing. We've seen some new acquisitions closed. We've seen some financings closed. So things are going, I think, considering where we are, things are going actually very, very well at the moment. It's not to say, you know, that we're not, as I said before, looking at the future, the oil price, the long-term growth prospects. But I think where we are today, you know, it's as good as we could have hoped for.
No, brilliant. That's all good news then by the sounds of things. I think we've got a couple of questions which have come in already from people listening in, and so I think it might be good to try and get to some of these. I think picking up really off the kind of conversation we were having around the kind of oil and gas threat or not, as it may have seemed. There's a question coming in really asking what separates you from companies, for example, like Lightsource or other ones in the space who have obviously partnered with the oil and gas side of things, and you know, do you think you'll be able to grow as quickly or more quickly, or kind of how do you see that playing out?
I mean, as I said, it's a big space. We have competition from oil and gas. We have competition from pure play IPPs that have been there for a while. We have competition from utilities that really have made a big move towards renewable generation in the last couple of years. I think the niche that we have, where we are successful, we are global, so we have the ability to really focus on the market that has the best growth opportunity at the point in time, and we can shift resources and skill sets to those markets. We are very well funded, so as I said, we have a strong group of investors that are advised by JP Morgan IF behind us that allow us to, you know, really invest and drive the business forward with confidence. We have a superb team that is specialized in solar, and really allows us to be creative around solutions. So I think that is really our advantage. So we are small enough to be nimble and to adjust quickly. We are very well funded to be able to make sizable transactions and grow in a sizable way. And we are very, very focused and not at risk of really being sidetracked with other opportunities. There's other people in the market that, you know, have similar things, but I think that is really our niche where we've been successful and we will be successful in the future.
No, that's a brilliant response. I think picking up off that point, you touched on the fact that you're kind of working globally, and I know we discussed that previously. A question here just asking around if you have any operations in Africa at all at the moment, and if if not, then why not? And is this something that you perhaps be looking at?
Yes, we have operations in Africa. We have a operation in South Africa. In terms of growth, it's kind of, we have from our investors a focus on OECD markets, and that really drives our growth strategy at the moment. So where we are looking for new investments.
Sure. I think another point actually that came up here when discussing the oil and gas piece, and also I think more widely with regards to energy transition. And do you feel that kind of as we do start to rebuild from COVID and potentially oil remains cheap and available, do you think this will in any way kind of infringe the drive to renewables? Do you think there'll be a continued mixture, or would you say that energy transition now is on a trajectory that regardless of potential low oil and gas prices, that you'll be able to forge ahead?
That's a big question. So what we've seen throughout the crisis is a shift in the energy mix and the electricity generation mix. So we've seen for electricity generation, renewables holding up and actually going up in terms of total generation. We've seen coal drop most, followed by oil and gas. Now, some of that will revert as demand picks up again. But I think the fundamentals of the market have not changed from the economics perspective. So renewables are cheap, they are getting cheaper, and there's a lot of effort and focus on solving the problem with intermittency and connecting them to the grid. Now, what we've seen is that a lot is possible. So these grids can operate with a higher renewable penetration than there was before. And also we have enormous amounts of momentum anyways in the population and among the regulators to drive green change. Now, if some of that can be translated in the stimulus activities going towards renewables, that would be great. So far, we've seen not very much, I must say. I think Germany just passed something last night that has a kind of bigger green focus than we've seen. Otherwise, there's a lot of uncommitted stimulus there. But I think there's a potential to have this as a catalyst for more development in the renewable space, in CO2 avoidance, and in tackling climate change. But it needs decision making really from the governments and from the regulators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think it's probably a topic that we'll explore a little bit more actually next month with our Build Back Better piece that I believe we'll be discussing with you next month. There's a couple of final questions I think that we might be able to squeeze in. I think one linking back to the point you mentioned earlier about potentially kind of partnering with a wind company to deal with that kind of downtime. Is that something that you look at purely from a partnership perspective, or do you foresee a future where potentially you are kind of building and operating your own wind assets as well as your solar operations?
So we are very focused on solar and on solving intermittency at the moment. Where we see ourselves investing more rather into wind is really storage. Storage potentially in the hydrogen space. Which we see when we can make a bigger difference, and that's closer to where we operate. But all options are open, but this is really the focus of our activities at the moment. Okay,
interesting. And then finally, you talk a lot to the point around kind of technology and kind of building plants, I guess, that endure. Do you look at all at acquiring any other solar assets? Is that a part of your plan, or is it a case of new plants and kind of continuing to improve your plants as well as adding completely fresh ones?
No, we do both. So for us, it's important to increase our portfolio, to increase our power plant portfolio and generate more electricity. And we do that through development construction, but also through acquiring existing plants and freeing that capital up for other people to do the development instead. So we are ambivalent how we grow, and we've been very active on both fronts.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I think, as I say, it's getting towards half an hour, and obviously I massively appreciate your time today, and obviously sharing all those insights with you. It sounds like, yeah, whilst you've managed to kind of navigate this period well, I think that, as you say, the future looks bright. So hopefully we'll stay in touch over the coming months, and we look forward to hearing more from you at the Build Back Better Symposium in July. But once again, a massive thank you for joining us today, Axel, and thanks everyone to tuning in as well. As I say, there was a couple of questions we couldn't get to, so apologies to everyone, but as I say, the recordings will be sent out within the next couple of days, so everyone can see them there as well. Once again, Axel, a massive thank you today, and best of luck for the next few months and going forward.
Thanks a lot. Very happy to have been here.
Thanks, Axel. Cheers. Bye bye.